It's quite strange because I can't see who's popping over, but whoever you are, hi. We're going to be joined by Paul in a minute. Let's see. Hey, hello.
Hello there. How you doing?
Good morning to you. What time is it over there right now?
8 o'clock in the morning.
And where are you dialing from for the listeners who don't know you?
In the moment, I now live in Scottsdale, Arizona. So until next week, I'm on mountain time in the U.S. So it's 8 a.m. here. Yeah. And the sun is just coming up.
It's crazy, man, because the sun is going down in an hour here.
Exactly.
And I'm dialing in from London. So hi everyone, welcome for joining this conversation. It's going to be crisp and we're going to dig right in. But before we do so, Paul, maybe you can briefly introduce yourself and share something silly about yourself as well.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here, and it's always nice to be in the same room with Anisa. So, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, pleasure.
So, my name is Paul Tolchinsky. My claim to fame is probably that I'm one of the co-founders of the European Organization Design Forum, which you happen to be our next steward chair for, and I've been an organization design practitioner for almost 50 years. I actually started as a human resource person for a new product development process.
I love how you said that, a human resource person.
Well, I had the title of human resource something, but I was really I was hired as a part-time consultant to a General Foods factory that literally launched new product test market products. So somebody would come up with an idea and we would build a production line. We would make the product, we would take it to the market and test it. If it was successful, then we would scale that production line up into a whole factory. If it was unsuccessful, we would say, thank you very much. Go home. We'll call you in a couple months, and we designed and the products that I actually helped launch were, do you know Pop Rocks? This candy that explodes in your mouth?
No.
It's a candy. It wasn't very successful back then. I think it's
maybe
back
that's
on the
why.
market. I think, the other is actually a stuffing, a bread stuffing called stovetop, which was like, how you make a bread pudding from a box, right? That actually was successful. I think it's still on the market, but it was so I was the HR person for an incubator, basically. And every new product required a new technology to implement it, and a new work system and a new way of organizing people to do it. And the lead consultant was an external person by the name of Eric Trist, whose name may be familiar to you and lots of others, is one of the founders of Socio-Technical Systems. And so he was my mentor. And it was an incubator for really looking at how is work created, how is work designed, what creates good work, fun, exciting, energizing, safe, right? And
that's gonna be the conversation here, right? Like, because this term of whole scale change, it's a fancy buzzword almost, but in simple terms.
So let me tell you. So here's the story. So because I thought about from whence does the word whole scale come, and the story is as follows. I was doing work in a Corning glass factory that made everything from headlamps for automobile headlights to glass dishes and bowls, right, for storing in your fridge. And the plant manager came to me one day, and we were talking, and he said, "Why does change have to take so long?"
Valid question.
Right? Why does change have to take so long? And I thought, I mean, you know what I mean? Every consultant ever worth their weight in gold always said, 2 to 3 years, right? But there was nothing scientific about that. There was nothing empirical about that. It was just a good job for 2 or 3 years, right? But so his question got me thinking about, what he's right. Why does change have to take so long? If everybody else is improving their processes, why can't we as organization theorists, psychologists, et cetera, improve ours? Why does, and so I began to experiment with what are the things that hold it back, right? What are the things that stop the time? And then the second thing so that simultaneously with that happening, I was having a conversation with a woman who became my partner after, about her question was, why did the few have to decide for the many? Why can't the many decide for themselves? In the old way of doing organization design, we engaged a design team. It was a representative cross section. Oftentimes it was a very egalitarian, you voted on the representative from your team. So we had good reason, and we picked good people, but it was 20 people deciding for 200, or even more, right? Yeah. And her question was, why did the few have to decide for the many? Why can't the many decide for themselves? And then I thought, well, that's part of the problem with speed. Part of the problem with speed is you take so long selling what you've decided because you haven't engaged people in it, that the cycle time, you waste more of your cycle time trying to convince people to the solution you've created, even when good people have created them, right? And so what if we could eliminate that part of the cycle time process? What if we didn't have to sell you on the change, and we didn't have to spend months convincing you that it was the right answer, right? What if you created the answer for yourself in the moment? And so we began to experiment with how to do that. And at that time there were lots of people experimenting with what we call large group interventions, right? And
yeah, because on that note, what would you say is the difference with whole scale change? Because I've read that used interchangeably.
Well, I think it gets to the term itself, right? What's different is whole scale is about whole system. That's the first word, whole. It's a holistic approach, a systemic approach to change, right? It's whole system. Not all large group methods are whole system, right? They don't engage the whole system. They don't look at the whole system. They don't embrace the complexity. They try to keep things simple, right? Whole scale says that doesn't work, right? You need speed, engagement, and complexity because that's the way the world works, right? So the first thing that's different is, a future search is about a vision for the future. Is it whole system? Well, it tries to engage all the stakeholders. Open space might or might not be a whole system because whoever shows up are the right people. Right?
And for those who don't know open space, what is open space?
Open space is a large group intervention where people are essentially asked to convene around a question.
Yeah, or problem solve.
Or problem solve, right? Yeah. And so it's loose in the sense that, hey, if you're interested in that topic, come. If you're not, don't. Right? In whole scale, it's much more thoughtful, right? There's we, as a consequence of bringing people together, we want to accomplish the following. In order to do that, we need whole system thinking. And so it is a little bit more, whole scale is a little bit more structured than open space. It's probably actually not as structured as future search. Future search has a standard agenda, right? You do this on day one, you do this on day two, you do this on the morning of day three, boom, boom, boom. So what whole scale is about whole system. And then the scale word is sometimes you work in large group and sometimes you don't. We didn't like the term large group interventions because it focused on a large group, which presumes you have to have a large group in order to do something, which isn't necessarily true, right?
So are you saying with a whole scale change methods, you can cater any size, any group size,
It's
basically.
scalable. It's scalable. I mean, you
Got
know,
it.
it's the question in whole scale is, who are the critical voices, or who are the key stakeholders whose voices would be important to achieving your purpose, right? That you need to include, you know, and so in every moment that changes, right? And so the scale is, it could be big, it could be small.
Yeah.
It could be more homogeneous, it could be more heterogeneous. It could include external stakeholders and internal stakeholders. It could just be one or the other, right? You know, and so it's purpose driven, right?
Mm.
And so purpose becomes the North Star,
Yeah.
right? If we understand what do we want to have be different as a consequence of bringing people together, then we can begin to think about what's the right constellation, what are the right conversations. And so everything is designed unique to that moment, right? Where future search is a pretty standard agenda. Open space has at least a methodology for creating emergent topics, right? People bring what they want to talk about, you know, and so the rules of open space in terms of voting with your feet, you know, and things like this, you know, whoever shows up are the right people, you know, I mean, so whole scale is robust enough that you could actually do open space in the context of a whole scale event. You could do elements of a future search in a whole scale event if it was purposeful and purpose driven, right? And so, you know, so the genesis of the methodology comes from these three questions, right? How do you move fast? How do you engage the whole system? And sometimes those seem to be oxymorons, right? I mean, how do you usually speed and engagement are inverse related, not directly correlated. Right?
The larger the group, the more time it requires to align and all of that.
And that's not true. And that
it depends on but it goes back to the purpose, right? It depends on what purpose you have. If you want a sustainable change, then probably it's going to be quicker. Yeah.
You know, it comes from the place, you know, underlying whole scale is two things. One is the belief that the wisdom is in the system, right? And so you know, whole scale is about tapping the wisdom of the system, and the second is basically the thing you don't focus on is the thing that usually bites you in the butt, right? You know, and so you need to embrace complexity. Some people's way of dealing with complexity is to try to simplify it, but you can't simplify it, right? You need to embrace it, right? And so you need a way to do that. In whole scale change, when you bring people together, whether it's face to face or virtually, you're bringing the complexity of the moment, right? Skills, tools, perceptions, expertise, right? Data. You're bringing all of that complexity into the room, right? And you're asking people to surf through that complexity in a way that enables them to create a solution that might be unique to the moment, right? So
yes. Oh, sorry, Paul. So two things. One is for those who are listening who are like, how can I engage here? Please do pop your question in the chat because we are monitoring the chat as well, because we're halfway through the conversation.
Yeah,
and second, I know time flies, man. And second of all, Paul, to those who are listening who are like, yes, this totally makes sense, then the fundamental question becomes, but how? So in terms of approach, can you talk us through an example situation or case where you applied the system or the principles of the whole scale change, and what is it that you did? What is it that worked really well? And what is it that you faced as a challenge?
I'd be happy to, you know, because the other, you know, I said earlier that we didn't like the idea of large group, right? But this other term is critical mass, right? How do you reach a tipping point where you're only going forward, you're not going backwards anymore, right?
Yeah.
What's the magic number of people who need to be supporting and aligned to the end in mind that you could actually make it work? You know, so the case example would be, I did a project a couple of years ago in a hybrid electric vehicle business.
Mhm.
We'd actually bet on combustion electric, not all electric. And so they found themselves a little bit behind the 8 ball, right?
Mm.
They had 2,500 employees who were all dedicated to combustion engines and some version of electric, but it was still combustion driven, right? And they needed a change. They needed a new strategy, right? Because they'd actually guessed wrong. They needed a whole new set of structures, right, to get close to the customer and to the markets and things like that. And they actually needed to change the way they work, the culture, because while it was hybrid electric and the business of the future, it didn't have a really good market reputation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so the idea was to engage a critical mass of employees in reimagining the future, strategy, structure, and culture, in a way that would build momentum to ensuring that it would happen. And so you know, in WholeScale, we say engage the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the outcome of the whole process. It's not necessarily you engage the whole system in one event. You can't bring 2,000 people from, you know,
so let's say you have 10 events, and each of these events 100 people turn up, and then you have that 1,000
exactly hit. And then you have your critical mass, right?
Got it.
You know, and so and that, because WholeScale is about designing a meeting, face-to-face or virtual, designing that collaborative dialectic conversation, but it's also a roadmap for change, right? Mm-hmm. How do you build a critical mass so that people are engaged and supportive of the direction you choose, right? And so, you know, so in the hybrid electric vehicle, we created 15 teams of people, 15 to 20 people per team, each looking at a different aspect of changing the business. Some were looking at strategy, some were looking at structure, some were looking at culture, right? And we brought them all together in one room, 200 plus people, in order to understand the project, the charter, and the way you engage, you know, and over a course of a couple of days, people understood the mandate, they understood the reasons for the change, they understood what role they could play in it in some way, and they had an opportunity to get together in their action teams to sort of think through, what data do we need, how would we approach it, how do we get it? And they actually had 90 days from that launch event, big group, to work in small groups to create recommendations and solutions, right? You know, and so, you know, and so the scale is, we started big, a couple hundred out of the 2,000, and then we went small, and then we came big again, where we brought all of them back together where they could compare notes.
Yeah, it's like diverging, converging, diverging again.
An essential principle of WholeScale is converging and diverging. Because as soon as you converge, people want to diverge. And as soon as you diverge, they feel the need to come back together. So you need the cadence and the time boxing that allows enough work to happen in the diverging, so that when you converge, you got something useful to talk about, right? And so over the course of 3-4 months, 15 teams worked. They periodically shared with each other virtual calls, check-ins, and things like that. We brought them back together to share what they had thought. Right? We collected all their ideas and their thoughts. They got feedback and inputs from all of their colleagues. They went back to their workplaces and shared in their work sites what the proposals were. They got feedback from the whole system. They came back one more time and made the final decisions, right? You know, and so it's large group, small group, large group, small group, converge, diverge, converge, diverge. And it's a little bit like breathing in and breathing out that way, right? You know, and other methodologies, I mean, we couldn't use open space in this case because we knew what the topics were that we needed to look at. In order to make a good business decision, knew, I mean, the phrase they used to use was, what rocks do we need to look under, right? And, you know, that was, you know, so actually in another project I worked on, they called them the rock teams, because it was like picking up a rock and looking under the rock. But, so the topics that would help inform the choices, right, that would stretch their thinking, create new possibilities, the topics were clear, right? How you responded to those topics and what you learned from them and what you decided as a consequence was wide open. In open space, you could have created the topics real time. You could have invited, anybody who wants to come.
Yeah.
I mean, open space, we could have used open space in that moment, right? I think the biggest open space I've ever done was 2,000 people. The biggest whole scale event I ever did was 2,500. In Europe, the biggest whole scale event I ever did was 1,100, and it was the merger of two factories, right? In Germany, there were two factories that were being merged together into one, and the only thing that they could agree about is neither one of them wanted to merge, and both factories hated the managers for making them do that, But in order for it to be successful, people were going to have to learn how to work together.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't do it in small groups. You had to bring the whole system together. So the client found the largest conference center in Berlin they could find and literally bust 1,000 people, right, for 2.5 days to this event where people could meet each other, learn from each other, share experiences, find common ground, and actually redesign physically in the moment, redesign their workspace, because we literally had breakout rooms where they could actually reconfigure they could actually walk through the layout of what their particular part of the new factory would be.
And so one of the things that, and I just want to say to the audience, I see you, I see the chat. So Paul, before we close, we're going to go through a couple of things that were raised here. One of the things that I personally always found quite challenging with this is integration, because you have so many different perceptions, so many different understandings of reality, different topics, and also different levels of analysis. What is on team level is different for organizational level, and vice versa, and stuff like that. So how do you enable integration when you engage so many people?
I mean, the first answer to the question is people have to see the world others see, right? So before you integrate, you have to differentiate. You have to be able to see all of the possibilities and get the broadest perspectives possible, right? Integration and alignment don't happen without purpose, right? And so, so part of the answer is you see the world others see. You try to get as many different perspectives as possible, not because any one of them is right or wrong, but because each perspective guides somebody's behavior. That's number one. Number two, you define some criteria or principles or end in mind that become the universal framework, right? We don't decide something, how do we decide something if it's a debate between your idea or my idea? But but a healthy debate is which idea does a better job of accomplishing the end in mind, right? Yeah. So you use design principles in your work as an org designer. I use design principles, or North Star vision, some aligning point of view that we could say, which of the options in the choices does a better job? Here's my example. In a project I did within the CIA, there were 4 possible new organization designs that had been created at the request of the workforce by the leadership team. But the criteria was the leadership team had to be willing to accept whichever of the 4 people decided on collectively. Right. Yeah. So 700 people are deciding which of these 4 is going to be the one we want to go forward with. And the process of getting to the one was having people look at each of the 4 and appreciate what they like about it and critique what they don't, with the question being, if that was the answer, if in our worst nightmare, the group accepted option one, our least liked, what would have to happen to option one for us to embrace it? How could we change it so we would accept it? And so for each option, people deliberated what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, and what would have to be changed about it in order for them to be willing to accept it and move forward with it.
Yeah.
Right. And when the final solution was chosen, we actually said, okay, that's the answer. Now, go back into your table group, mixed group, 8 different opinions, and talk about what would need to change about it as it stands in the moment in order for you to be, our principle was 70% comfortable, 100% committed, right? And to the point that just got posted on, people have to choose for themselves, right? And we actually had a long debate about, in this CIA example with the 4 choices, we had a long debate about how do you decide? Do you get a red dot and a green dot? Do you, do you put a red dot on the one you hate the most and a green dot on the one you like the most? Do you do it anonymously with some kind of keypad? Do you do it as a table? I mean, there's 700 people. There's, 8 people per table. There's, 90 tables, whatever it is, something like that. Does every table get a vote? Or is it every person gets a vote? And there was a lot of discussion about how do you make the process transparent? How do you enable people to express their opinions? If I don't like it, my opinion about it should still be important, right? And so if you're not 70% comfortable, what needs to change about it in order to get you there? Because no answer is perfect.
No, 100%. That's absolutely.
Right.
Yeah,
no answer is perfect. So 70% comfortable is, I think there's probably a better answer, but in the moment I can't think of it. But I'm I get what we're trying to do, and I'm 100% committed.
Yeah.
Right. That's me choosing.
Yeah.
The other part the other nuance to your question, Anissa, is what about the person who sits on their hands and says, this is bullshit?
Yeah, you also have that. Like, in fact, like loads of times.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, in the 70-100 rule I use in large group is I say, if you're not 70-100, raise your hand and I will call on you. Right. And I will. I mean, my example was, right, guy raised his hand. I said, where are you? He said, I'm 68% of the way there. He said, okay, what does that mean? So tell me what's the issue and what would it take to get you to 70?
Yeah.
Right. And we had a conversation with this person with 350 people in the room where he would offer a suggestion that would make him more comfortable, but nobody else liked it. And I looked at him and I said, do you feel heard? I mean, do you think people understand what you're saying and what your concern is? And he said, oh yeah, I think, I think they, I feel heard. And I said, well, what would it take to get you to 70? Because in the moment, none of your people seem to really be committed to what they like. And he said, he looked around and he found the CEO sitting in the back of the room. And he said, well, if Corbin, that was the CEO's name, Corbin would buy me a cup of coffee and a donut, I think I could let it go and we could move on. Everybody applauded. And but the reason why he was willing to do that was because he felt heard.
Yeah, exactly. Acknowledged as well. Yeah.
I've done the exact same thing with a 3-colored triangle, little 10 card, right? A little 10 card, red, yellow, green. Right? Yeah. Red, yellow, green. Yeah, if you're green,
different methods to get to the same same outcome around integration.
Right. How do you uncover what might be resistance that's under the surface, right? In a way that ensures that people are really making an honest choice, and they're not just playing along or going along. You want committed people, so they're 70% comfortable, but they got to be 100% committed.
Yeah. There's one element that came up in the chat, although the lady I think left, but I'm sure she wanted to check the recording. So let me just go there. She asked about what's the connection between whole systems change and coaching systematically. Now, I don't know what her definition is of coaching systematically, so let's work with some assumptions, but how would you respond to that question?
Well, I mean, I think if I understand the question, what WholeScale does is it enables the system to coach itself, right? Because you're learning from your, especially when we used to do these mostly face-to-face, people would feel like they had been plugged into a mainframe and they had information and perspectives and data that they never had before, right? Yeah. And so the system is enabled to hold a mirror up to itself.
Yeah.
Sort of mirror on the wall, right? And so it becomes a self-coaching mechanism. We see all of our strengths, we see our weaknesses, we see the different points of view, we see the challenges leaders have in getting alignment and commitment across people who have different opinions about things, and so it's sort of it's a light touch coaching way of thinking. And that's the first answer. The system coaches itself. The second is in the design, every WholeScale intervention, face-to-face or virtual, is designed by a microcosm of those who will participate.
Yeah.
I don't design it. They design it. So
yeah, but that's crucial. Hang on, before you move on. But you don't design that because you are not a member of the organization, and therefore you don't know who should be there to form a critical mass, right? Yeah.
I have no idea what the topics are, or what the conversations are. What are people talking about at the coffee cooler, at the water cooler in the coffee room? I'm blind to that. And so I trust, go back to what I said 10 minutes ago, I trust the wisdom of the system, right? Yeah. My job is to get them to see the world each other sees and to design the conversation that they believe they need to have. So I'm coaching them to coach the whole, right? People say to me, well, if you have 500 people in the room, how many facilitators? Say 2.
It's
right?
possible.
They say, well, if you have 1,000 people in the room, how many facilitators? I said, 2. Well, if I have 50 people in the room, how many do you have? Well, probably 2. And because the system facilitates itself, you're training the system to be self-sufficient and to be
a process, right?
Through the process, right? Yeah. Through the process, right? And so, and in a lot of the real-time strategic change did the same thing. Open space did largely the same thing. Future search, maybe not so much. Search, maybe not so much. Conference model, maybe not so much. But the idea of creating self-sufficiency in a system begins with having a group of 8 people at a table feel confident enough to manage themselves. And if those 8 people can do that, I had one table, the logistics person came to me one day and said, table number so-and-so needs to see you. I said, what's the problem? It's just, they won't tell me. I go to the table and I say, okay, what's the problem? One of the people at the table says, we can't do this exercise because our boss isn't here. I said, well, wait a minute. For the last 2.5 days, you've been telling me that bosses are useless and get in the way. So explain to me why it is you can't do this.
Yeah.
And the light bulb went off in the guy's head and he looked at his other people and he said, oh shit, get the flip chart. We got work to do. I mean, you're trying to create self-sufficiency that can then migrate back to the real work, right? In WholeScaleChange, you're trying to change the culture while changing the system, right? You can't change the culture at the end. You have to change the culture starting at the beginning.
From the very beginning, yeah, exactly. Through that collaboration and through going in that process and working together. Yeah. Paul, we're over time, but I mean, you can talk about this for hours, which is what you're going to do also in 2 weeks in Rome. And I believe there's also another opportunity for people in the US, and I believe something in China.
Yeah. Well, I announced that I'm retiring at the end of the year, and so I'm doing a series of what I call my lasts. And so in Rome on the 19th and the 20th, I'm going to do of March, Stelio Verzera and I are doing what we're calling actually the last and only advanced whole scale. And so for people who are comfortable with everything we just talked about and want to go deeper, right,
Yeah.
and still have 100 questions about how to do it, what's underneath the hood, how do you convene the design team to plan the event, what's the logistics requirements, how do you facilitate with 1,000, whatever all those are. So on the 19th and 20th of March, we're doing an advanced.
And we'll post after this, after we close this session, we'll post the link of that as well on our EODF webpage, so that people are aware.
We'll do a basic. How do you do this in the UK in June, in all likelihood, hosted by Tricordant and Nick Richmond. We'll do it again in September in Vienna. It'll be my last.
Oh, cool!
It will be my last in Vienna.
It's like a world tour.
Well, Vienna, you know, if you remember, I lived in Vienna for a number of years, and I have dear partners and colleagues there. And when I said I'm going to retire, they asked me if they could do it with me one last time. So we're going to do it one last time. I'm going to, you know, and so they'll be in the U.S. I think it'll be either September or October. There'll be one in Montreal in September, or October, and then one in Las Vegas in September or October. And so there'll be two in the U.S., one East, one West. And that'll be, and then I'm going to come to the EODF conference, wherever that might be, in November, and that'll be my last. And so there you have it.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, we should create like a little overview with all those dates and timeline, location.
I can send you a quick email.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That would be great.
Okay.
So before we close, if anyone who's listening or has been listening is like, well, I would love to attend those trainings, and I would love to be there, but I won't make it for whatever reason. What would you recommend for people to engage with in terms of content? Could be books, articles, videos, podcasts.
You know, there are a couple of videos of large group events. If you actually can't imagine 250, 300 people in the room, on YouTube, you'll find, you know, if you Google WholeScaleChange, or even, I don't know if there are any real-time strategic change videos, you know, but a lot of WholeScale is founded in the roots of RTSC, which was sort of the precursor to WholeScale. There's the book WholeScaleChange that you can buy at Barrett Kohler. There's a WholeScaleChange toolkit, which is more of the how-tos and the agendas and the designs and what the activities look like. That you just need to email me, and I can. That's published on demand, so you can't sort of go. I don't think you can go to Google. I don't think you can go to Amazon and buy that. You know, there are certainly articles there are probably 50 articles on WholeScaleChange that are by myself, my old Dana Miller Tyson partners, that people could find. Those would be the probably 2 or 3 best ways.
For me, it was quite funny to watch those videos, because they're really like proper old, like 80s, 90s videos.
Well, you know, and the reason for that is because the methodology was so new and unusual that people couldn't imagine it. And number one, and so clients actually made those videos as communication tools to share with people who weren't in the meeting. Right. Yeah. So they were actually a part of the communication process methodology coming out of all of these. And so, you know, and then once the uniqueness of them wore off, people didn't feel the same need to make the videos. So, you know, we probably haven't made a video in 20 years, but there are a dozen videos, to your point, that sort of take you back. Mostly they're all 90s. I don't think there's any in the 80s, but they're all 90s to early 2000. Exactly. Yeah.
It's just funny to see.
Yeah, there's a younger version of me, which I always joke looks like, you know, a 40-year-old version of me or something like that. But that's, so if you sort of get over forget the clothing and the hairstyles and things like that.
Listen, the hairstyles and the clothing, they're totally up. They're totally in right now. So I was like, I want those trainers. That's what I thought.
There you go. You know,
cool.
but and the videos, most of the videos are either process or organization design. There's one, the Richmond Savings video, which I'm pretty sure is online, which is about strategy development in a bank. So if you're a visual learner, those are good
to
reps.
look at. Yeah, there's plenty. So I think we'll also pull something together from EODF and just post it on our platforms. Thank you, Paul. I'm so excited to see you in 2 weeks. Exactly 2 weeks.
I'll see you exactly in 2 weeks. I'll see you soon. Be well. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. All right.
Yeah, pleasure.
Be well, everybody.
Else, please join us in the training in Rome or anywhere in the world for Paul's world tour.
If you need more information, ask